welcome to Get NIST-Y, the webinar series that breaks compliance out of the checkbox trap and turns it into a real security advantage. No fluff, no FUD, just practical strategies to make compliance work for your MSP. I'm Jared Kasner. I'm joined by my co-founder at Blacksmith InfoSec and co-host of Get NIST-Y, Mike Zabarski. And today our special guest is Michael Kennedy, Information Security Manager at LionGuard. Michael, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Like I said, Michael Kennedy, Information Security, a little bit of everything at LionGuard. So I've been in mom and pop shops all the way up to Fortune 50s, and honestly, security has been my main focus and bailiwick really for I guess about the last 25 years. But thank you for having me. Full end-to-end relay compliance, security configuration, a little SOC, a little bit of everything. So I'm excited to go ahead and have this conversation today, and thank you for the invite and the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, we are so glad to have you joining us today. So today, in this episode of Get NIST-Y, we're diving into what will be driving compliance in 2025, 2026, and beyond. And so with that, let's just dive right in. And let's get spicy right to start with, right? So the Trump administration has promised an era of deregulation and business-friendly practices. I think the results of so far in the first almost 100 days have been a little bit mixed. We see things like rolling back funding at CISA and things like that, and at the same time continuing to put pressure on Facebook and Google right. So we got kind of a mixed bag from the Trump administration as far as regulation and deregulation. We brought Katie Arrington back in to run CMMC. There's some proposed changes in HIPAA. I guess let me turn it over to Michael. What does your crystal ball say as far as federal regulation and what's going to happen over the next couple of years in the Trump administration?
So honestly, I'm cautiously optimistic is what it was. So as far as bring back the architect of CMMC, I think that's a positive thing, right? So I understand they cut funding, and I think really it's more reallocation of funding and really assessing where they're going to go ahead and spend the funds. So I think it's more of like a pause than it will be discontinuing the program is my general belief. And then especially, I think that's solidified, my belief is solidified by bringing her back, because she was the architect, the founder, and has the full vision. And I think that they're willing to go ahead and continue to execute that and actually push that effort, knowing that it's going to take a centralized force within the government to deliver. And then also, it's the only way that we're going to level up those contractors and entities that are working for the federal government, right? Without some consistency and a holistic approach and baseline across the board, then we'll be back where we were in the early 2000s, where everybody does their own thing. So I do think it's less of a just check the box effort. They're trying to go ahead and identify where the juice is for the squeeze too.
Excellent. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, Michael's correct in that. They brought her back, which was great. They are looking to, once it fully goes live with the latest DFARS piece, they're looking to update it to align to 800.171 R3. So that'll be a change coming down the line. They're still talking about updating HIPAA. So I don't think the federal regulations are going away. The other piece is they're talking of expanding the scope of CMMC and what CUI is past DOD as well. And so, again, it'll affect more federal contractors.
Right. Hey, for those of us in the room who may not understand all the acronyms, CUI, can you maybe clarify what you mean by that?
Yeah, so controlled unclassified information. So stuff that shouldn't be shared, but isn't classified. So a lot of it is how do you keep, contractual items secure? It can be things that are less secret or aren't classified as secret, top secret, etc., but still need to be maybe not shared outside the U.S. If it's for some aspects of data, or stuff that can be, but again needs to be controlled and not just shared willy-nilly.
So you're saying that signal invitation I just got from Pete Hegseth, not something I should respond to?
Exactly.
Excellent. All right. So cool. We've got it sounds like a pretty rosy or optimistic outlook that the federal government is going to be leaning in, at least on the CMMC side of things. You touched briefly on HIPAA, Mike, and I mentioned that also. There's some proposed changes that are coming, or that were announced in January. Where do you have again, pull out that crystal ball? What does the future say? Is HIPAA changing in the next 4 years? How quickly are we going to start seeing some changes, and what might we expect from that?
Yeah, I don't know. I have my own predictions. I don't know exactly.
That's what I'm looking for. Like, what are your predictions?
Yeah, I know. I think it's going to get a little bit more teeth. One of the biggest issues with HIPAA is there's an enforcement mechanism post breach, but there's no enforcement mechanism to make sure people are HIPAA compliant pre breach. There's a bunch of state regulations that New York has put out, like New York DFS, etc., that handle it better, where there's still not necessarily the proactive checking of, hey, is firm A compliant with it or not? But there is, what they've done in New York is basically have the board or the head of the company personally be liable and personally attest to the fact they're doing this. And so those businesses are giving a lot more scrutiny to their security programs, making sure that, CEOs and boards don't want to go to jail, don't want to pay large fines. So they basically are making sure they're actually becoming compliant with this stuff. And I think something like that with HIPAA would be good as well.
Michael, what's your take?
So I agree. I think it's also kind of in preparation for, I personally believe in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have a federal privacy standard. I'm not saying GDPR but like we have 10, 12 states now that have their own version of the privacy standard. So I think really this is partially in alignment and then goes towards being preemptive, right? Instead of being more left of boom instead of the right of boom, like Mike had said. So I think this is an effort to go and do that, but also I think it's being driven, I would speculate, by somewhat from the back end too, of the underwriters, and those, because the industry itself, just the high visibility, the costliness of a breach within that realm. So I think it's being pushed from a private standpoint too, from the underwriters and the insurance companies. I think it's more of an alignment, kind of a consolidated effort, if you will. And I think it's just going to go and shake out somewhat in regulation.
Excellent. Yeah, and we'll touch on insurance companies in just a minute here, but I want to pick apart some of the things you two were talking about with the state level regulations, right? We know first there was FedRAMP, then there was StateRAMP, and then we started seeing folks like Texas rolling out TexRAMP and building their own version of kind of the StateRAMP, which is, I think it's a 99.8% overlap with StateRAMP, and so why they needed to have their own framework, who knows? Michael mentioned New York Department of Financial Services and their regulations. And I know there's education law 2D in New York State. Massachusetts has some state laws. Michael, you're talking about privacy. We have CCPA and VCPA, and you name it. There's a different privacy acts. Personally, I am very optimistic and hopeful that the federal government will come in and do some federal regulation and get rid of all the state level things, because as a business trying to comply with state laws in California and Massachusetts and New York and Delaware, and having to do everything all at once, it gets to be tedious. But how quickly are we looking at something like that realistically happening?
So my belief is that's going to be driven by tort law, right? It's going to come down to litigation, right? It's the monetary driver that everybody looks for. Just like GDPR, it was out there. Sarbanes-Oxley originally is out there. Some ambiguity. Nothing really came of it until there was the first big fine, and anything more than just a slap on the wrist, and then you start to see people mobilize. Then it becomes more of just a check the box effort. It actually truly changes the culture and has a direct impact instead of just giving you the warm fuzzy, hey, we're doing something.
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't know that we're going in that direction at all. I think we're getting there, but I think it's going to be state driven and sector driven, not federal government driven. I think that every time we've tried to do something from a federal level, it still becomes a state opt-in piece. As you just mentioned with like TX ramp, like there's already a state ramp, TX ramp. came out of nowhere for no reason, with very minimal modifications. I think just because of the way that the U.S. is structured, I think it's going to continue being sector and state driven versus like an NIS that they have in Europe, or NIS2, sorry, where they have that federal regulation. I don't know that we're going to have that.
I can see that from the onset initially, right? Organically, that's how it has to grow. But when you start taking into consideration litigation and then just the structure, right, of our legal system, judicial system, and then also the fact that like California is extraterritorial. I mean, that's the way it's phrased. It's just like GDPR, but how does the enforcement happen? We do have a greater opportunity within our legal system to enforce it, you know, at least within the US states. So I think that's really where it's going to start. When you start seeing those conflicts, then I think that you'll have to have the engagement from the legislative side to go ahead and start easing the burden on some of our judicial systems is how I see it working out.
Yeah, and I actually sort of view this as much from a business standpoint. Businesses are going to start to demand some level of consistency, right? If I, again, as a business owner, if I have to be compliant with state law in 27 different states because that's where my customers are, guess what? That puts a huge burden on my business. And so how am I supposed to run my business? How am I supposed to keep up with all those different regulations, right? Like that's the piece that it gets to be incredibly frustrating for a business leader. And we've seen that a little bit in the auto industry, right? Where California pushed out electric vehicle guidelines, and the automakers basically all fell in line and said, that's the standard that we're going to adopt nationwide because it's, I mean, actually, I just saw this morning, the headline was California becomes the fourth largest economy in the world by its like, so when you start to see things like that, where state level, big states like California, Texas, New York start to change things and drive that conversation, I think businesses are going to start to force that conversation a little bit, and may actually start to put some pressure on the federal government to do a kind of federal regulation. Mike, you look deeply skeptical.
Mike, you think
No, I know it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, right? The good news is one of us is going to be correct.
Well, do you think some of that may come out in like reciprocity agreements from a state level, right? From a regulation standpoint, I think Jared's right. There's the common core of requirements are going to be the same, just like best practice, right? It's how you go ahead and check on the applicability of it, and then also the level of detail or scrutiny for prescriptive versus non-prescriptive controls.
Exactly. And it'll be, from a business perspective, it'll be choose the most robust one that you have to comply with, and then everything else will kind of funnel up into that. So
yeah, so let me shift gears a little bit here, right? What if we say that rather than federal or state level regulators being the driver of compliance, what if businesses are actually the driver of compliance over the next 12, 24, 48 months, right? Is it going to be a bottoms up demand from SMBs, MSPs, vendors driving that compliance conversation? What does that look like to you, Mike?
Yeah, it'll be interesting, right? Because a lot of that businesses, especially SMBs, are driven by revenue. And so what they care about is how do we not get sued? How are we not held negligent, liable, etc.? How do we get contracts, right? Now, a lot of the software vendors that I talk to in general will say, hey, do you have a SOC 2? Well, I don't know. Like, do I need a SOC 2? Will I get business if I get a SOC 2? Will it help me earn more business, right? Because if the answer is no, then right now is not the right time to do that. You should still do those practices and get yourself aligned to it, but going through the audit may not be the way for you to go, right? So I think a lot of it is going to be, how do we minimize the damage and how do we mitigate the risk and get aligned to the risk appetite that we have?
Yeah, well, and Michael, you talked about left of boom, and so what's your take on how businesses can help kind of drive that conversation and shift that conversation to be left of boom?
So you see that in such as like the PCI, right? PCI, there's no need to really push it from a regulatory standpoint because the card providers, the major brands are making sure they've got their ducks in a row. I think you're right. We will see some of that happen organically. And the other thing too is, as Mike said, really, it doesn't matter what framework you pick, right? You're going to go ahead and tailor it and customize it and find out what that balance is to go ahead and actually protect your revenue stream and offset your liabilities. You're going to have to figure it out. So I do think businesses will do what's right for them financially and also do what's right for them to go ahead and grow and prosper, right? That's the way it is. It's the nature of business.
Yeah.
I was just going to say the last thing is, I think the biggest thing, Jerry and Mike, is probably education. Like the smaller organizations, we kind of talked about this a little bit previous, comes down to where do they start, right? How do they get an understanding of what really is important? And yes, we have frameworks, but those frameworks are just a foundational place, right? A springboard, and then you still have to customize those or tailor them to the way that you do business in the industry that you're in.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. It's definitely a lot about operationalizing that. And to your point on PCI, the other piece of that is going to be kind of the larger vendors like the MasterCards, the Visas, pushing that stuff down onto their subcontractors and people that want to do business with them, making sure that they've got compliance programs in place.
Correct. Yeah. There'll be an economic incentive to make sure that the controls are in place. And that will then trickle down in cost savings for the SMBs or mid-tier markets.
So are we expecting to see that in the form of that economic incentive being in the form of contractual obligations then?
Probably, or lack of contract signing, right? Like if you don't have these controls in place, we won't sign with you. Or again, kind of going to right of boom. There was just an incident where a HIPAA covered entity sued their MSP because they signed the BAA, but they weren't following HIPAA security rule, right? So whether that enforcement is upfront to say, hey, we're going to actually go through a third-party risk questionnaire and make sure you have the stuff, or we're going to put it into contract language, and then we're going to hold your feet to the fire to do what you said you're going to do.
I also see an organic growth within services in the market, right? You have service providers now that are coming out, and all they're doing is acting as intermediaries to go ahead and try and figure out, like from the insurance companies, right? They're then hiring, some of these are via, it's not insurance anymore, it's assurance. So you go ahead and pay for a fee. They're making sure that and validating your controls. And then if something happens, they allocate the resources in block form to go ahead and help remediate it or rectify the situation, right? So you're seeing some of that from highly regulated industries that are working with insurance to go ahead and do that because they understand the risk exposure there. I think you'll see more and more of that in other industries because that's where you're getting streamlined efficiencies, right? Just the way you deliver security within an SMB range, within your MSPs too. So I do think it'll shake out organically, but I also think that there's market providers there that are stepping in because they see that there's money on the table. And I also think the businesses are like, okay, this is saving me a ton of money because I'm going to get what I need out of it. And not just, once again, we talk about not just a check the box solution.
Yeah, so lot to unpack in all of that, Michael. This is super helpful. I do think it's probably worth, given we've twice now touched on insurance. Let's maybe circle up to the third leg of this, which is the insurance aspect, right? So, insurance companies are increasingly denying payouts because you haven't lived up to your end of the obligations. That like you answer affirmatively that you're doing certain things, and then it turns out you're not. And so guess what? The insurance company denies your payout. Insurance companies are tightening things up. The questionnaires that insurance companies are having you fill out upfront for a cyber policy are getting longer and more onerous to fill out. MSPs are rightfully saying, maybe I don't want to be filling this out on behalf of my customer anymore. I need them to be the ones acknowledging that they're doing these things and taking on the risk of saying that they're enabling MFA, SSO, things like that are being done. What's also interesting is I've noticed within that trend of insurance policy questionnaires getting longer and longer is that not all of those items are being used to make policy decisions today. Some of those are being used to collect data so that when there is an incident, they can go back and figure out and correlate and start to kind of get their algorithms ready for the next one. So I guess, what are you seeing in the insurance market? Where are we seeing insurance maybe being the driver for change and better cyber hygiene within the space? Mike, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. Yeah, I think to your point of kind of you've got the insurance questionnaire. It's got, last one I saw was a little obscene. It was like 70 questions. They're really using 10 to 12 of those to actually cover for coverage. Everything else is data gathering, right? And once they see the tipping point to say, hey, 80% of people filling this out are doing ABC, we're going to require that as well. And so they're kind of pushing it almost proactively, but also making sure that it's not out of reach of people to sign up for. So once they kind of see, hey, the majority of businesses are already doing this, let's force the other 20% to start doing this as well. Michael, any thoughts?
No, that's definitely what we're seeing with our customer base, right? So the Cyber Essentials functionality is really driven by the insurance community, right? And our customers want to go ahead and make sure that they're meeting the compliance obligations there, or have some visibility on what to do. And that one of our founders uses the phrase all the time: you can't manage what you don't know, right? And that's one of the key things that they want you to understand is, hey, we do know what we're actually controlling. We do what our controls are. We know where they are. So they leverage our platform to do that. So what I'm getting at is, yes, we definitely see that as a driver. We see tools being developed and being leveraged heavily to go ahead and provide that level of assurance, because one, we know that it drives down our premiums, right? So that's the first thing. If you can capture that and communicate it effectively, and the questionnaires don't always do that in a well-articulated way. I think sometimes the reason the questionnaires are so long is they want to show that you're doing your due diligence, but also your due care. And if you have trouble answering those, then they're speculating whether or not you're truly doing them in the first place, right?
Yep.
So absolutely, I do think the insurance industry is driving it heavily, because it's an obligation to do business in many states, right? Just to make sure that you're covered in. A lot of companies won't do business with you at all if you're not insured properly. That's the first question they have.
No, and the other piece of this is they can iterate a lot faster than regulations, right? So they can say, hey, next week we're going to start requiring this. 2 months from now, we're going to start requiring this. It takes a while to pass regulations, whether they're state or federal ones. So they can push those processes and practices a lot faster.
Yeah, and so I guess maybe Mike, following up on that, what are some of the things that you've seen in the last 2 or 3 years that have become required by insurance companies? And I mean, I'll tell you, my own perspective is 5 years ago, there really weren't a whole lot of cyber liability policies being written. It was mostly kind of, if anything, from a cyber standpoint, it was as a little bit of a rider, and everything was kind of being covered under E&O insurance. Cyber insurance policies have been increasing in scope and velocity in terms of the number of providers offering them and how they're being issued. But what are you seeing?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot more of making sure that you know what kind of data you have. So a lot of them are now making sure, like if you have PCI data, they're asking you how many credit cards are you capturing. Same thing for HIPAA regulated entities, right? How much PHI do you have? So they're trying to really figure out, like, if there's an incident, how much are we going to be out, right? Those underwriters are all over that. It used to be, it's still a little bit of the Wild West, but when I was working at an organization, we did our first cyber liability policy. This was about 8 years ago, and it was, hey, do you have MFA, basically? And it was a complete Wild West, and it was maybe 10 questions. And now we're looking much deeper, looking at basically, it's almost like a CIS or SOC 2 Lite questionnaire. They haven't gotten to the point where they're sending out full SIG questionnaires yet, but one day.
Michael, anything you want to add to that?
No, it is definitely moving that way, and I think anything they can do to standardize and reduce their administrative burden, right, and create uniformity, that's where you're gonna go ahead and get the big benefit, right? So I definitely think it's moving in that way, and it's all about how to go ahead and minimize the burden from a cost perspective on both entities.
Totally fair. And so this kind of brings us a little bit full circle. We've talked about it, CMMC and HIPAA and SOC 2 and CIS and NIST-CSF. And right, so we've got this proliferation of frameworks. Are we going to start to see some convergence around common frameworks, or having the frameworks converge and map to each other? Like, what are you seeing from I don't know, there's like 400 some frameworks out there now. Are we going to see any convergence from the framework standpoint?
So from my standpoint, I think we already are with the tools that are being provided, right? I mean, even CIS is done mapping back to NIST. NIST is done mapping. The framework management bodies are already doing that for us in many fashions, right? And then with the proliferation of tools out there, all your GRC tools have that inherent in there. So you're already getting a common core set of how those are mapped up. And I think by doing that, it's driving that. And once again, going back to, it's all best practice for the most part, right? You overlay best practice, like it's just how they check and how they validate. That's the bigger question. But I do think even you're getting some very cheap GRC tools or open source GRC tools that do the mapping for you now. So I do think that you're going to see a consolidation, and like instead of that control set, you're seeing like universal control set instead of NIST framework or CIS framework. All of them are valuable, and all of them are driven typically by a specific industry or industry sponsorship. So there's too much out there. It has to be consolidated. It just has to.
Yeah. So interesting you bring up the universal control framework. I mean, Michael, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, there's a couple different ones they're trying to tackle it, right? There's the universal control framework. There's the secure control framework that does cross mapping across. There's OSCAL that's trying to map it all across and make people's lives a little bit easier. I don't know that we're necessarily going to have full convergence, just because it's easier to say, hey, you need to be compliant with HIPAA or HITRUST than, hey, you need to be compliant with these 50 controls of ISO 27001, right? So I think there's still going to be controls, different control frameworks. Again, the cross mapping, there's tools out there that do it. There's agencies that do that. It'll be interesting to see if there's some consolidation in there, because some of them, again, you can get certified against. Some are there kind of just as best practices. And also it goes back to what's the business use case, right? So the business in the US that's trying to do business internationally may want to go down the path of ISO because they want to get certified, and that's an international standard. If they just want to get some best practices in place, go down the path of NIST-CSF or CIS controls, right? So there's different use cases for the different frameworks.
Yeah, just to that point, I agree, Mike. There also, we talked earlier between prescriptive and non-prescriptive controls, right? Those that are mandated, you don't get an option based upon the industry or based upon the desired accreditation that you're trying to drive towards. And you have those that are really risk-based efforts or non-prescriptive controls based upon how you do business or whatever data elements or industry that you're in, right? So with that aspect, you're 100% true. They'll always be different control sets and frameworks specifically for that. But I do think we will be driving to a universal framework for the foundational, that the Pareto rule, that 80% is probably not going to change. And the common body will be prescriptive controls, right? Just a question of how in depth you want to go ahead and get.
Yeah, excellent. No, I mean, that's very fair.
Cool. So we've kept the audience waiting 30 minutes now. I think we've made the case for why federal and state regulations might be the driver for compliance over the next couple of years. We made the case for why businesses might be the driver for it. And we made the case for why insurance might be the driver for it. Final answer, we're going to lock it in. Mike, I'll put you on the hook first. What do you think is going to be the drive? Which of those three, which one do you think is going to be the real driver over the next couple of years?
I think it'll be states.
You think it'll be what?
States.
States? Okay. Do you want to give us the rationale
No.
here?
No.
Total cop out. All right, I love it.
No. So I think that federal is going to be moving too slowly. Again, they're going to have the stuff they have in place right now as far as CMMC, etc. But I don't think they're going to be putting out anything new. They'll update HIPAA probably, but again, there's not going to be a U.S.-wide framework that they put out that they mandate for everyone. I think states have already started running with it. New York has different regulations for different departments. Massachusetts has some. California has some. So again, they're tackling it either by state or by sector, but at the state level. I think that there's always going to be, and I think that's going to be a flow down at that point, right? Because if someone mandates, hey, you have to do this, then the vendors that are doing business are going to mandate that their business associates, in the case of HIPAA, or their third-party suppliers, vendors, et cetera, are also doing it because they don't want to end up in the news because of their supply chain.
All right. Thank you. Michael, your turn. Final answer. What's it going to be?
All right. I think it's going to be driven by the business themselves or by the industry back in. Just it goes back to the bottom dollar and what it takes to go ahead and minimize the cost of doing business. I think that's going to be the driving force.
Yeah, and I'll lock in my final answer is the economics, which is a little bit of a cop out to say it's probably a combination of insurance and small businesses, but the reality is it's going to be the unit economics and how do I lower the cost of delivering services? How do I increase my revenue? And how do I use compliance and cybersecurity as a competitive advantage? Guess what? It's going to be using those as a tool to drive revenue up and cost down. And those are the two things that competing and helpful things that are going to make those decisions. And the cost down is going to be that insurance angle, and the revenue up is going to be the contracts and the contractual obligations. And so I think that's really what it's going to boil down to. Cool. So I do have a couple of questions from the audience. For those of you out there watching live, please do feel free to put more questions in. But let's go ahead to some audience questions here. We touched a little bit on the pre-questionnaire from insurance companies, but and Mike talked a little bit about audit time. But so when it is audit time, whether it's for compliance, like a AICPA for SOC 2 or for your cyber insurance auditor, like how much time are you spending pulling together change logs and access controls and system documentation? What does that process look like? And Michael, I'm going to turn that one over to you first.
So one, we use a tool. If we didn't have a tool, then we would just be crushed by physical like evidence gathering and requirements, right? That's really what it comes down to. And I think that's the case with a lot of companies nowadays. So as far as the amount of time, I would say that we easily allocate probably 100 to really 200 hours internally to that. And then also stacked on top of that is quite a bit in external professional services and a tool. Is really, but because as Mike had mentioned, the CUI that we deal with for our customers, we do want to go ahead and make sure that we have not just the checks the box effort taking place, right? And that's part of it too. That we could get by with probably a lot less spend and a lot less effort and time if we did the bare minimum, but that's not the type of organization that we are. And I think that's the case for many, trying to figure out what that is. And a lot of that comes from executive leadership, right? Board direction or company culture. So I know it's a cop out too, Jared, but a lot of that is really driven by the leadership's vision and understanding on how they manage risk.
All right, Mike, anything to add there?
No, I think Mike Michael covered that really well.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a follow-up question, right? Because there are some things that tools are really easy at capturing automatically, like have you turned on MFA and enforced MFA, right? You can do that programmatically and check that out. There are other things that are more difficult for a tool to capture automatically. It's one thing to capture your list of users automatically. It's another thing to review that and make sure that that list of users is accurate automatically. And so, Mike, maybe you can talk to some of those things that are less easy from an automated standpoint. Like how do you handle those and manage those effectively?
Yeah, all of it's about business processes, right? You need to have some way to have an authoritative person say, yes, this is correct. Even when there's automation in place, you still want to kind of spot check automation because sometimes automation breaks down. And so we've seen this before with some tools where, they'll do a check and they'll say, hey, MFA is on, and then it's not on for all users, for example. And so whatever the API call was may not have actually pulled it properly. That was not FineGuard. But yes, so check your tools, and when the tools pull it in, like you still need to give it context, right? Now you have the information. You don't have to log into 12 different systems. You log into one system, and now you can actually check it with that and make sure that it's correct. As far as making sure people are correct, there's only one way to do that, right? Even if you automate user list from Microsoft against user list from HR, you still need someone's eyes on there to say, hey, are the roles of Microsoft correct? Or is someone be a global admin when they shouldn't be? So you still need that physical touch from humans.
All right. Well, we touched on MFA here a little bit. We actually had a user question about MFA. So MFA enforcement sounds straightforward, but across multiple tenants and platforms, it's easy for gaps to slip through. How confident are MSPs that they've got full MFA coverage? Mike, maybe we'll start with you this time.
So, well, that's a nice segue. No, that's actually one of the key aspects as far as dashboarding from our tooling, right? We have direct tie-ins with multiple tech stacks to go and pull that information and then do the validation. So really the easiest way is to go with a known vendor that can go and provide that. And then, like Mike said as well, you still want to go ahead and you trust, but you verify, right? And that's the validation in the back end. So we not only go ahead and pull that in, but we go ahead and pull it from several different aspects to go ahead and verify with our data prints. And there's some other tools that do that, but I also caution people not to go ahead and just hang their hat on 100% the output of a native tool, right? Because once again, what caused the problem can sometimes be buried in the dashboard of the visualization of the problem later if you're only going native. So that's my thing is go ahead and use a tool, use an automated tool that does it for you. And then also you still have to have that validation. You have to be engaged. You have to know what looks right and prudent, and then review it regularly.
Yeah, and the other piece is there's a lot of software solutions out there, and no matter what the tool you use, they're not going to have integrations with all of them. So there's still going to be, your accounting system, your HR system that may not have integrations built out, and you still have to go in manually validate.
Yeah, the custom integrations and so my last statement on this is everybody thinks they're a coder in PowerShell or whatever scripting language of their choice, and it may be beautiful, it may be wonderful, it may be awesome, but they often don't think of the additional administrative overhead going forward, the burden, because many of those services like Azure Active Directory or GCP or any of those are constantly changing and shifting the way that they deliver those microservices too. So just take that in mind, that what you have developed internally, if you use an in-house solution, may be beautiful and work phenomenal, but are you going to continuously feed that? The care and maintenance may be crushing.
Yeah, I mean, we'll just use AI to write those adapters and those custom integrations, right? That, like, what could possibly go wrong there? I'm going to put that one aside because that's a topic for another webinar, another day. We can go deep into that one. I did have a question about AI. Mike, I'll turn this one over to you. Do you think we'll see this is one of our user questions viewer questions. Do you think we'll see AI used more in compliance enforcement, like insurers or regulators using it to audit policies or logs?
We do. I know Mike or Michael. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Mike. We're gonna give Mike a chance to talk here.
No, I think they will start using it. I go back to AI as a very solid C+, B- student, and so it goes back to you still need to verify. Looking at policies to pull out, hey, is this statement in there or something like this statement is relatively straightforward. Validating controls, again, can be straightforward. But again, when you're getting an 80% answer, you're still going to have people behind it validating it. But you have the same thing right now with auditors, right? You have your auditor that you're dealing with, and you have the QA process behind that auditor. So the process won't change. Maybe the front-facing piece may change a little bit to AI, but you're still going to have humans in the back doing QA until AI takes over the whole world.
All right, Michael, now you get a turn.
No, my answer is going to be the same. It is because we know for a fact that we already are seeing auditors and insurance companies use it and leverage it to go ahead and get that 80%. And then to Mike's point, it's still being overlaid with human resources to validate and verify that that's the case. So it definitely is a game changer in doing some of the fundamental base work, or at least the data gathering.
Yep. No, and I think that very much aligns with my own personal view, which read something the other day that I think came out of Harvard, which is essentially AI is not going to replace people, at least not in the near term, but people using AI are going to replace people not using AI, right? And so I think there is certainly a force multiplier. Mike has heard me go on this soapbox quite a few times, but essentially my view is AI is going to, and Mike talked about this a little bit, AI is that B student. It's going to get things 80% right. What you need is the expert who knows the 20% that's wrong, that AI didn't get right in order to drive things forward. And I see this with developers where you get a junior developer who doesn't know the 20% that's wrong and you end up with buggy code. You see marketing and sales techniques and copy that is 80% right and 20% wrong. And the good marketing and sales execs will be able to spot the 20% that's wrong and fix that and get that moving forward. But it's really, how do you get that human in the loop to make sure that you're moving things forward in a productive and effective way? And so that's from my perspective where we're going to see AI getting used is that front line to kind of get things and the surface things that you need to kind of highlight, but you're still going to have that human in the loop. All right. So last user question, just in the interest of time here. If you had to pick one framework for an SMB to align with today, which one would you recommend and why? Michael, why don't we start with you?
So I would say CIS. I say that just because it's much easier to digest and understand for someone that's just getting into it. It also, the tools that they have available for a layman or a novice to go and get in and start asking those right questions on how it is for the business. And also, I think it's less burdensome, right? And I say that because a lot of the controls are kind of packaged. And for the most part, they're non-prescriptive controls until you identify what the risks are, right? And it kind of gives you a frame that it gives you tools to understand what that is and then how it maps back to the framework. Where when you just jump into NIST, even CSF can be crushing if you don't know where to start.
All right, Mike, your turn.
I'm going to give you a cop-out. It depends on it depends on your industry, and it depends on where you do business.
Coward. Take a principled stand.
So I'm actually gonna go the other way from Michael, and I'm gonna say CSF. And the reason I do it is with CIS you have your IG1, IG2, IG3, and so it gives you room to grow and implement controls. What I like about CSF is you kind of start at the higher level right away and have to solve for it. And yes, it's less prescriptive, but it allows you for those risk conversations. If you write your policies against the full CSF, if you say, hey, these are gonna be aspirational control metrics, and then basically anything you're not doing today, just work as a risk, add it to your risk register, accept it, mitigate it until you finally close that gap. But that way you're not just kind of creating this false sense of security by saying, hey, we're going to do CIS IG1 and we're good because we've got a framework. You're saying, hey, we're doing to switch CSF to CIS. We're going to do CIS SG1 or IG1. We've got that done, but we still have a bunch of other stuff that we need to think about and need to work as a risk, etc. What I've seen from a lot of the SMBs is they get to IG1, they say, cool, we're done, without actually looking at IG2. And if they did that, then I'd be more for that, Michael. But I want that continued risk thought process going.
I think mine is covered by my experience. Just I've started that with several because of the industry they were in. And then we talked everything. It was just crushing. They couldn't see how to eat the elephant. So
the answer is always one bite at a time. Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us. Michael, especially thank you for joining us today. I've had a ton of fun talking to you and getting to know you better through the course of this. For those of you joining us today, join us next month when we'll be joined by our friends at Nodeware to talk about leveraging compliance to sell more security services. That'll be May 15th at 1 p.m. Eastern. So stay tuned and we'll find out more. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you for work.
Yeah, we're bringing the heat. Cyber strong compliance on repeat. Get NIST-Y. Let's secure your fate with Blacksmith InfoSec. Don't hesitate.